very warm welcome to everybody. I am Shrija Agrawal, and today we're going to talk about the big news, the unraveling of Jet Airways. Of course, the question here is not really about what really went wrong with the airline, but essentially trying to understand that what it really means for the larger airline industry, what are the lessons learned from this experience, and how we take it further from here. But before we get into a discussion of something like this, I would like to take you a little back in time and begin with a story here. The British de Havilland Comet 1 was the first commercially produced jetliner in the world. In 1953 and 54, it was involved in a series of mysterious accidents. What used to happen is the machine used to go up and break up in the air. After a series of investigations, it was found what was really the reason for the issue. It was found that the hairline cracks had appeared at the square windows of the airlines, which is why you have oval windows right now. The cracks kind of appeared through the fuselage, and which is why it kind of spread across the airline, and you had these machines breaking up in the air. But the most significant consequence of this entire disaster was that the flight investigator actually installed a near indestructible black box into the entire airline system to record thousands of data per second, including even the conversations of pilots in the cockpit. And here I really want to quote what the flight investigator really said that day, that everything we know in aviation, every rule in the rule book, every procedure we know because someone somewhere died. With each crash, future flights became safer. This is exactly what the black box thinking is, derived from the black box actually installed in the airlines, which essentially says that mistakes are to be learned from and not to be concealed. It's extremely ironical that Naresh Goyal, despite being in the airline industry, could not really learn from the important lessons of black box thinking. Aviation has managed to establish such an excellent safety record because they just applied this throughout. They just learn from their mistakes rather than concealing it. Hello and welcome. I am Shrija Agrawal. With me are two very interesting guests today to decode the good, bad, and the ugly of the airline episode. With me is Jitendra Bhargava, who is a former executive director at Air India. And also joining me is Manish Agarwal, who is infrastructure lead practice at PwC. Manish, thank you, and Jitendra, thank you for talking to us. My first question to you, Jitendra, is that if you were to give me the good, bad, and the ugly in terms of the learnings that we have, and where do we go from here in the Jet Airways episode, how would that be for you?
You see, the first thing is that Naresh Goyal had it easy entry into the aviation industry, because when he came into the industry 26 years ago, there was only Indian Airlines. So to beat Indian Airlines was relatively easy. There was no baptism by fire. And then he had this knack of manipulating our political system, policies, decisions being taken to facilitate him. 5/20 rule was one, not to allow the other airlines who don't have 5 years experience in fleet to 20 to be giving him competition. So there were umpteen of these factors that led to it. So what does it lead to? Complacency. He did not have fire in his belly to fight competition. So when Indigo beat him as the number one domestic player, we did not hear from him that, look, I've been dethroned from this position and I must do something. So this basically sums up his attitude. So when the going got tough, he showed his weakness.
So there were warning signals.
They were plentiful.
Like the black box thinking, there were mistakes to be learned rather than he kind of concealed them.
You see, I wouldn't say just signals kind of. I think there were alarm bells ringing all around. Everybody knows it that the market dynamics do not favor a full service carrier. It's a price sensitive market. The fares are regulated or benchmarked by the low cost carriers who can recover the cost of producing a seat, but a full service carrier cannot. All of Air India's losses were dubbed because of inefficient management, government interference and others, but the obvious reality of market dynamics was overlooked, that you will not be able to break even. The fare difference, if you go to a travel portal, any sector, the difference between a low-cost airline and a full-service carrier fare is very small. Does not compensate for the additional amenities that a full-service carrier provides. So when you sustain losses over a long period, what do? He did not follow another of established global practice. All over the world, whenever an airline is in crisis, the first thing you do is downsize your operations.
He actually went and bought an airline.
Consolidate your finances. He did nothing of this kind. He kept looking for funding. First was Etihad, 24% equity acquisition, so he got money. Earlier, he had got a whole lot of money out of the IPO at a huge premium that he got. So then when you have this easy money coming your way, you were really not building up systems. And now are we noticing? Employees leaving Jet Airways, joining other carriers, and what is the underlying message? That they are taking a huge cut in their emoluments. What does it signify? That Jet was paying far more than the market salaries and emoluments.
So of course there have been issues and there have been learnings. I mean, there have been critiques on his management style, the fact that he acquired Air Sahara at such a huge price.
Air Sahara was a long time ago. Let's look at the last 5, 6, 7 years. Now, when you look at Jet Airways, now as a private sector airline, and there are lessons also, because what has the government been wanting to do with Air India? Privatize it. On what model? Exactly the way Jet Airways was, that we will professionalize the board, so to say. We'll have a private management decision-making body keeping out of the government control. Now, if he has failed, there are reasons for it. Was the board really professional? The answer is no. Who was on the board, for example? Sometimes they were film stars, right? Then later, he got 2 civil aviation secretaries, former civil aviation secretaries, Ashok Chawla and Nazim Zaidi. Now, when you have Secretary Civil Aviation on board, it's not because of the expertise that you will lend to the airline. It's because they may have helped them in some way earlier. Now, when you have this kind of non-professional, unprofessional approach to running things, it's not a desirable course. And last few months I've analyzed it. Occupancy factor. If SpiceJet was doing 93%, Indigo 89-90%, Vistara 88%, Air India 82%, Jet Airways was only 84%, 85%. So even when the alarm bells were ringing, he was running short of cash, defaulting on payments, the marketing team did not get into the market to get good load factors for it. You see, we can all sympathize with the employees. But somewhere down the line, whether it is the aircraft utilization, whether it's the on-time performance, whether it is the occupancy factor, he was not number 1, 2, or 3 amongst the carriers.
Okay, so I think Manish, I come to you. We just heard from Jitendra. I think much of his argument is that Naresh Goyal kind of failed to sort of take the airline forward, and there were enough sort of alarm bells ringing, and he sort of chose to ignore them. But not necessarily talking about Jet, but this is not necessarily a story of one homegrown airline. We have seen a lot of other airlines also go belly up. Can you perhaps sort of deconstruct that what really is in the model of the airline that we sort of fall through this very often?
Yeah, so Shrija, I think looking back, it's easy to kind of do a
postmortem,
if you will. But if I take a more macro view of any industry, the theory of it is that there will be efficient players, inefficient players. There will be new entrants, and those who are inefficient will fall off. So and the airline industry is particularly where this kind of plays out regularly and is seen quite clearly. So if you think about Indian airline industry in the last 5 years, massive growth. In terms of number of flyers, in terms of increase in airport capacity, number of places that are getting linked. The number of aircraft that are being added over the next 2-3 years is more than the number of aircraft that the country has.
True.
So there's a massive addition. In a change of this sort, different players will come in with different strategies, and some of those strategies will succeed, some will fail. Some strategies will be right, but the implementation will be not.
Mm-hmm.
So with the benefit of hindsight, one can very well say that look, a full service carrier has no place, and maybe it doesn't. But it is really about segmenting the market as it becomes more crowded. The other bit is in most industries you will find that 2 to 3 players account for nearly 80-85% of the market. That seems to be where the competition versus sustainability seems to settle. So as soon as you have multiple players, that equation will start kind of falling off.
Mm-hmm.
And whoever is then lower on utilization, higher on cost. So clearly the average revenues are higher for Jet, but so are the costs, and costs are higher by a larger margin.
True.
I think the related point is that in India, one is able to fall back on banks to get funding. And I'm again saying this more from a broader infrastructure perspective, having seen this not only in this, but in whether we see roads or any other infrastructure. The process of economic diligence by banks leaves a fair bit to be desired. And then it being public sector banks, it becomes a public interest issue. If these were private sector banks, it would be a much lesser of a public interest issue in terms of some businesses going out of business. That's the theory of business. So that's the way I would put it. The last bit I'll add is that this industry, as many others, are fairly government dependent. So again, from an industry perspective, I would think that it's less about any individual player, but MRO becoming more affordable, leasing becoming more affordable, fuel becoming more affordable. All of those are things that I would think that if the government should focus more from an industry perspective, and then really let the demand supply efficiencies play off.
Interesting. Then we just heard Manish what he spoke about from an industry perspective, what the challenges here. But talking specifically about Jet, so where do we go from here now? Because there are various concerns coming from all quarters. One is the employees. The second thing is passengers. Those who have booked tickets. And third really is about the question of minority shareholders, really bought shares of Jet. We have seen this story play out in the past when Kingfisher was temporarily suspended. We never saw it back in the air. Are we seeing a similar kind of scenario for Jet too?
Well, a possible rerun of Kingfisher is in the offing. I wouldn't dispute it. But let's look at the market dynamics as I said earlier. When you have a price-sensitive market, the fares have to be commensurate with the cost. Of course, we're not in a cost-plus industry. It's a competitive environment. But Rahul Bhatia of Indigo, Ajay Singh or SpiceJet have gone on record that fares need to go up. Question is, who will bail the cat? They are the dominant players, low-cost airlines who need to first jack up the fares so that full-service carrier can have some kind of a premium on their fares and recover the cost. They have not been able to do it. So the ideal thing would have been for a professional management of Jet to have tweaked the business business model. Now they did not do anything of this kind. Now the lenders came in and lenders said, look, you are defaulting on loans, the aircraft are being taken away by the leasing companies, employees are not being paid salaries, what do we do? Now the signs were visible. Now banks are not the right institutions to be leading an airline. They don't have the requisite.
But the fact is that they threw the promoter
no,
out.
They could see this way. They were looking at protecting their 8,200 crores of money invested in Jet.
And he was went on the train.
Now they were optimistic, and it's unfortunate that we had the chairman of SBI come on and say we've been doing a lot of groundwork in the last 3 months, and therefore the promoter Naresh Goyal must step down from the board. We will have a chairman, we'll have a management team in place, and we will put in 1,500 crores of rupees. Nothing of this kind happened. So today, what do the headlines say? Banks' refusal to give emergency funding led to grounding
but
of
that
the
was
airline.
a surprise, right? Because
Now,
when you took control of an airline and you refuse to infuse cash.
So,
so they have to clarify their position.
What I'm trying to put across is that the banks have, by their stupid actions, right, kept the main issues away. Now we have to get the attention of the government or the regulatory bodies that just as fleecing a passenger is bad, so is charging a fare lower than the cost of producing a seat, because it eliminates competition. Airlines with less deeper pockets cannot survive. So unless you have this built into our industry, you can have any more of these instances in the offing. Now every time an airline collapses, it sends a very negative signal. Now of course, in the next 6-8 months, with the kind of capacity augmentation that's going to take place, you will forget the shortage of capacity, and therefore also forget Jet Airways if it does not get revived. Now the fares will come back and people will be forgetting everything. Now is that the way to go forward? The answer is no. We need multiple players in the market, players who can appeal to various segments of the traveling public, but you must be running an airline professionally. Now that is where, in my opinion, Jet Airways had faltered.